this evening, there's a gentleman from Massachusetts who's very kindly agreed to come and share his experience, strength, and hope with us. So, Mark, it's over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's a privilege to be here. My name is Mark. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. And let me get rid of that. Okay. Experience, strength, and hope. None of us get here by accident. I certainly didn't get here by accident. On the 2nd of October coming up, I'll hit 44 years through the grace of God and doing it one day at a time. I'm looking out over Plymouth Bay, Plymouth Harbor, and I'm actually able to see the site of my first drunk when I was 16. I'm 74 now. Seems like I've spent most of my life trying to get out of this area, and somehow I keep ending up back here. Right now, I'm at my mother's house. She's 96, and we're taking care of her and extremists. And it's a privilege to be here. My first attempt at trying to drink was my brother and I. He has since passed. Each got a fifth of liquor, and we proceeded to go down to a little landing down here. And there was a guy who was just out of Marine boot camp, and they were having a party for him, and which means there's half a dozen cars and people standing around drinking and having a good time. And I proceeded to drink most of that in about 25 minutes. And I walked out onto the mud flat, tide was out. And I distinctly remember that mud flat coming right up and hit me in the face. And not surprisingly, I spent the next hour or so trying to outrun the tide because I could feel it licking at my feet. And I was sick to the point where, like, every time you'd lift a finger and try and crawl another little bit, you'd throw up. And I just kept at that till someone noticed that I was half in, half out of the water. I realized that I needed to figure out how to drink. I spent the next 14 years trying to do that. I was in the service by the time I was 17. I've had the privilege of being in Hawaii and in Japan, attached to a weather ship out doing nasty patrols in the middle of Pacific and middle of North Atlantic. And I've been to St. John's, Newfoundland. I've been to numerous places. But you know what I remember? I remember the inside of various bars, and I remember the inside of their men's room. And it didn't occur to me at the time that, that there was a problem. I just figured I still hadn't gotten it right. And, we would substitute drugs for alcohol when we were out at sea for 6 weeks at a time. And this was back in the early 70s. So there was no email. There was no communication. You'd get a bag of mail every 6 weeks or so. And so whenever you went on patrol, you needed to make sure you had enough to get through. And I look back on it now, and there were so many lost opportunities and so many times when, but for the grace of God, we didn't go over the side. Insanity. And we thought that we knew so much better than everyone else. I don't know. Life was crazy. Life continued that way for a long period of time, just trying to maintain and not get caught. And I'm impulsive. I married my minister's daughter. We'd been going out for 4 days, and it seemed like a good idea. And that lasted 4 years. And we parted ways fairly amicably. And I found my second wife, who was just as crazy as I was. And she was different in a way, though. She was a blackout drinker, and that scared the hell out of me. And I spent the next 6 years trying to see what I could do to change that so that maybe she didn't die early, And on her fourth detox, which actually turned out to be a productive one, as I was turning to leave after dropping her off, the intake nurse, Pat, said something to me. She said, "Are you ready to do something about your problem?" And nobody had ever asked me that. And to this day, I can't tell you why, but I looked at her and I said, yes. And I meant it. I absolutely meant it. I had hit a fork in the road without knowing it. I was given a choice. Do you want to go left or right? And I decided that, yeah, I would do something about it. And after having spent 6 years trying to get her into an AA place somewhere, I knew where to go. I also was working at the local hospital in housekeeping. I was the guy buffing the floors and shampooing the carpets and doing that kind of stuff. So I knew where the AA meetings were because a friend of mine and I used to set up the hall for those poor people. And so I went in there that Saturday morning and I sat in what I thought was the back of the hall because I'm an alcoholic and, I want my back to a wall somewhere so I can see what's going on. And of course, I was wrong. Dennis, who was all of 6'6" or so, picked up the lectern and walked from one end of the room to the other, put it down right in front of me and proceeded to start the meeting. And all I remember about that was that he stunned me. He talked about hope. And that wasn't what I was expecting to hear. I was expecting to hear about trials and tribulations and, all the anguish and stuff to go along with stuff. And because hope was the last thing I thought I was going to hear about. And he even talked about how he was just a year sober. And that to me seemed like an infinite amount of time. And he was challenging himself to take on one of his greatest fears. He was going to fly in an airplane, take his wife, who had suffered much through his time, down to Disney World. And he had a pocket full of candy, and he was, just pray on his way in, pray on the way up, pray on the way down. And it just amazed me. And people were listening in silence, which is another thing that amazed me. They were all well dressed. Before the meeting, they were laughing and there was lots of banter and everyone seemed kind of happy. And I was just lost in a state of what we used to refer to as mucus. In other words, I had a head full of mud. Nothing really made a whole lot of sense. And but I heard, just don't drink, come to meetings. And just don't drink and come to meetings. And then when we got ready to leave, I realized that there were like 5 other people that were brand new in that meeting. And the 6 of us are standing around afterwards going, well, what are we going to do? And someone said, well, why don't we go get some ice cream? And so we went to get some ice cream and we hung out together. And then somebody said, well, what are we going to do with the rest of the day? And the other guy said, well, we could try and find another meeting. And so we did that. We went and we found another meeting. And we did that for weeks. Those people and I, surprisingly, all of us are still sober. All of us within a few days of each other. We heard things like, go to meetings like you used to drink. Well, I got up every day and I'd get stoned before I got out of bed. It's like, so getting up in the morning and asking for help made sense. I mean, every meeting I went to, I felt better, confused, but better. And a friend of mine talks about being a feel-good junkie. And I see he and his armadillo in here now. I became a feel-good junkie. And, I wanted that feeling better. Life was beginning to make a little bit of sense in that, I kept trying to do, before I got sober, I kept trying to do the same thing, hoping it would be different. Now I came in and I was trying to do the same thing, hoping it would be the same. I wanted to keep feeling better. And then I started going to step meetings, which was a real hoot because I didn't have any clue. All these old guys in there, they were in their 60s and 70s. Now I'm 74. And they're talking about all this stuff. And oh, man, I could barely read one word to the next. But it'd come my turn and I'd read the word and, see what was going on and pass it to the next guy. And I really didn't have much to say, other than I was here and I was trying and I'm trying to pay attention. And, it just, it was an experience. And eventually, after a year or so, I cleared up enough that it was really making sense and I understood what it was about. And in terms of that, these were steps and they were going to be building blocks for a foundation for a whole new life. And I needed a whole new life. My life was a mess. I'd gone from being out there drinking and knowing that I knew all the answers to the day when Pat asked me if I was willing to do something about my problem, when I, out of nowhere, realized I had no answers. And these people were happy. And at the end of the year, I started feeling pretty good. I started to look better. My clothes were in better condition. I had a car that was legal. And I was just, I had a job. Things were changing. Uh, it's, they say get all wet in the program. It's like I'd go into a party somewhere and I look back on it now and I was a pig. I'd just keep firing stuff down or smoking stuff up until I just couldn't get any more in. And so I applied that same pattern to the program. And I got involved in doing something called an AWOL. That's an acronym for a way of life. It's a 26-week intense program of following the 12 steps. And you physically go through and write everything out and do all that. And I went through it the first time, and there's a parallel story in here because my wife got out of that detox and she and I are both sober at the same amount of time. So we're doing this sort of side by side, but not measuring each other's things, which is a real challenge. We finished that first AWOL, and the guy that was running it said he was moving out of state and they were going to disband it. And we looked at each other and we said, well, we can't do that. So we picked up the ball and ran with it and ran that AWOL for 5 more years. And in doing so, not just going through the motions, but actually doing the work over and over again, we discovered that, well, first off, neither one of us realized that the steps are a way of life, that we would be continuing to do them over and over again through the course of our lives as we continued to discover more and improve more. But we discovered that doing that, it was the actual doing of it that mattered. And changes came. I went from shoulder length hair and a beard down to here to being clean cut, having a respectable job, and looking in the mirror and being able to appreciate that I was healthy again. And and it's about rigor. For me, it's about rigorous honesty. I can't cut corners. I can't let any cheating in. If I do, the whole thing falls apart like a house of cards. I know that. It's never happened. Relapse is not a requirement for membership. I haven't relapsed. And this rigorous honesty, I tell a story that, my wife and I would drive back and forth to meetings. And at the time in the United States, the speed limit was down to 55. And I would drive at 55. And it must have frustrated the hell out of the other people on the highway. But I was afraid to cheat. Even going a few miles an hour over the speed limit would be cheating in my mind. It's like, I'm not going to do that. I want this. I want this badly. It feels good. And I got over that eventually, and I pretty much flow with the traffic now. But I just don't allow myself to cheat. If I have to say to someone, I screwed something up, I'll just tell them straight up, I screwed it up. I don't need to make up stories. I learned that I didn't have to do anything other than tell the truth, because then I never had to remember what I told somebody. I knew what I told them the truth. And life became much simpler and much more productive. I had a lot of opportunities in front of me. I had been experienced in radar when I was in the Coast Guard, and we had an air traffic control strike here in the United States, and they called for ex-military, and I went in and went through the schooling in Oklahoma City. And on the last day, the last test, I came up a quarter of a point short early in sobriety. And I looked at it and I took it and I said, I did my best. We had gone down there and plugged ourselves into meetings right away. So we had that stable platform. And we had that foundation and that strength. And I lifted my head up and I said, okay, what's next? Let's figure it out. And, you just do one day at a time. I've had the opportunity, well, my sponsor told me, make a list of all the things you'd really like to do in life. Doesn't matter how outlandish they are, just put them down. And then put that in the back of your 12-step book. And in 2 years, we'll look at it. Well, in 2 years, I'd done all of them. And they had all been out of reach. And life was continuing to just increase. I've had the opportunity to start and grow several businesses. They were successful. I was successful. I would sell them off or close them out at the end, knowing that I'd been honest as a tradesperson and what I was doing. Character building. I started racing motorcycles at 30, Superbike and Grand Prix. And you talk about building character. I raced for 10 years, and most races I came in at or near the end. But I would finish every race. And I might not be as fast as some of the people, but they were young and immortal. And I was in my mid-30s, and I was married, and I had 2 children. And when you throw yourself into a corner and you're just scrubbing your way around, you can't but think about your family and think about what you're doing. And I had to be honest with myself and accept that this was the best I could do. And eventually that came to an end, and it was good. I remember my last trip around Daytona. I was on the high banking, and I'm doing about 155. And I'm saying, thank you, Lord. This has been everything I dreamed it would be, and you kept me safe. And I know this is the last time around, and I appreciate all of it. And it's happened many times in my life. That marriage, we parted ways and are both sober. We support our children, and as a dad, I'm involved in both of my daughters' lives daily. One's in Seattle, which is in the northwest of the U.S., and the other is in Los Angeles in the southwest. And they actually talk to me about real things. It's a wonder. It's a gift. And I have the ability to do that because I don't pick up today, because I don't lie and cheat and steal. I don't delude myself. I've said often that, this is not a disease of alcohol or a disease of cocaine or a disease of heroin. This is a disease of denial. When I'm denying the reality of what life is, then I'm losing. And I like to live in reality. I like to live in the truth. To me, there are few things as rewarding as reaching out and helping someone else without any compensation. The compensation is being able to be there for them like people have been there for me. Being able to be here today is important to me because in order to keep something, I have to give it away. I have to tell you, this works. It's been working for me damn near 44 years now. And I don't have enough hours in this day to tell you the wonderful things that I've experienced or the horrible things that have happened that I have made it through with confidence and with faith and with sober thoughts. I don't hate anymore. I don't become violent anymore. I'm no longer a verbal terrorist. I can actually appreciate what someone else is going through. And that, but for the grace of God, would not have happened if I hadn't come here. Thank you for letting me speak today. Have a nice day.